This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders. What do you call a cliche once it falls out of fashion? Ever since the 1950s, for French rugby, inconsistency has been à la mode. A decade where they won 3 championship titles but secured a whitewash, winless wooden spoon in between them feels quaint when compared to the times they had ahead. A phrase got promptly coined, and it only got more intense once 1987 rolled around. France were comfortably the second best side at the first Rugby World Cup, before being even more comfortably the second best side in its first final. But from there, it got only weirder. Where you can sum up pan-World Cup stories with a single narrative for virtually everyone else, New Zealand dominate then choke, England compete without playing well, Wales either overperform or lose to South Sea Island, Argentina become world beaters if their path involves Ireland, we know. France said no. There is no pattern, no result to their results, no trends, no common threads beyond the oldest narrative of them all. Anarchy. France would lose to Tonga before dominating the final. They dropped the opening game against a still Tier 2 nation before knocking out the stone-cold favourites in the quarter-finals. They'd be bog standard before pulling one of the tournament's all-time greatest performance in a fluked semi-final. And in 2019, they did it again. A consistently inconsistent dogshit side were pulled apart and reassembled months before the World Cup. In came new kids, Romain Ntamack, Damien Penaud, Cyril Bay, Julien Marchand and Gregory Aldry, whilst this promising young nine now at Toulouse was promoted to the starting 15. They dispatched Argentina in the crucial winner-takes-all game, and in the quarter-final, with little expectation, almost sent the best Welsh side ever sent to a tournament home packing. A late Ross Moriarty try after Sebastian Valmehina did the dumbest thing I've maybe ever seen on a rugby pitch, enough to knock France out. A la mode. However, that evening, retiring captain and one of the most long-suffering men rugby has ever known, Guillem Garrado, had a few words to say and a vow to make. He looked at his young team and he saw something. In his words, if you young guys keep playing like that, not even the All Blacks can live with you. 2 years later, his words came true. The youngsters came of age as France smashed the All Blacks. It was an enormous, definitive performance that solidified Les Bleus as exactly what Garrado called, and at the time, world champions-elect. 4 years ago, we were asking the same eternally etched question that first came up in the 50s. But in 2023, we know which French team is going to turn up. And the question instead grew to be a little bit bigger. Can France go all the way and win their home Rugby World Cup? Garrado's prediction might have been bold in January 2020, but by March it felt logical, if not irrelevant considering everything else that was happening in March 2020. The speed at which this French side established themselves was frightening, rising higher every few months, every game seemingly getting better, securing second in that first Six Nations with all eyes on a beautiful, bold Toulousian halfback combo of Romain Ntamack and Antoine Dupont. With every passing match, the pair seemed even more destined to join the game's great pantheon of pairings. We're talking Edwards and Bennett, Nono and Smith, Bernard the Pot and Cookie Jars, Vomu and Cat, Wales and Losing, or serious issues at any major union and carpets. The pair would combine to take club and country to long-forgotten heights. 2 French titles, 1 European Cup, a Six Nations Grand Slam for the first time in a decade, and comprehensive wins over every single Tier 1 team. Ntamack and Dupont were the real deal. A pair who could understand one another so well they probably book each other's dental appointments, and played with a psychic, kinetic, flawless accuracy, pulling moments almost every match that would feel far-fetched on Rugby 08, even in that bloody Mario and Sonic Olympic one. They were a duo from Fantasyland, and yet, after but a preview of what they could do in 2019, but right before we could savour the World Cup where the duo Pont, the Ntamack, the Antoine, the Royal Match, the Toulouse twosome, the hamster and the head, the jeans and the freak, the halfbacks that make a whole, the Antoine Dupere, the Ally Mac, no one's a stretch, would be at their peak in front of a home crowd. This happened.
Now this is just where there's a bit of a twist in the knee.
He's checked it, there's no foul play there.
Ntamack. We're very much hoping that this is nothing serious for Romain Ntamack.
France had spent 4 years building to this World Cup, getting better, dismantling an inconsistent legacy. And yet, if you drew up a list of the worst rugby-related things that could happen in the lead-up to the 2023 Rugby World Cup, Romain Ntamack doing his ACL probably ranked third, behind Antoine Dupont doing his ACL and Rassie Erasmus's 8-foot cock gaining sentience in a YouTube channel. But for the last 3 years, whilst Dupont has provided the stardust, Ntamack has built himself into being the best game manager in the world. Across the entire professional era, only Dan Carter, for me, can match his innate feel for a game where most fly halves control the match like a horse rider in the saddle, vigorously whipping the reins to make it march on their terms. Romain Ntamack just gently caresses the beast. With the lightest touch, he can command a match. Ntamack plays off the calmest, coolest instinct, almost robotic. There's no fly half in the world better at identifying when to kick and what type of kick to put in. France are known for their free-flowing running game, but Ntamack's France kicks more of the ball than any other side in the world, stroking the game into his control by planting Le Ballon in the opposition half right before the defence gets on top. France tend to kick that one phase sooner than most sides, the passage before the opposition makes the tackle that will cost Le Ballon momentum. France regularly kick like this, sticking it long into positions where the defence will hopefully kick it back, and if not, they're going to be in trouble with how good their chase is. It looks like this. France with the defence up in their face here, bang it long, so the defence then has to retreat in order to get back behind the kicker for them, then when he kicks it back, the opponent only makes it to roughly the same spot as before, but suddenly the French players run into clear water instead of shark-infested custard. However, with Ntamack and his natural, gentle, stroking, gorgeous hair, game management, feel for the mat, really his hair, that's the main thing we'll miss. France find themselves instead presented with two options for the 10 shirt, neither of which have his hair, and that is vital. The more experienced natural second choice selection of the ramshackle wunderkind, Mathieu Jalibert, or the closest thing they can find to Ntamack, and by that, I mean the fly-half from France with the next best hair, La Rochelle's Antoine Hastoy. So this presents a sub-question that may just unlock the answer to whether France can win the home World Cup. How does Jalibert or Hastoy coming in for Ntamack change France's game, and can they possibly match the level that they achieve with one of rugby's great modern talents who's formed a once-in-a-generation pairing and partnership with France's key player and captain? While Jalibert has picked up an impressive 25 caps and played over 1,100 test minutes in Galtier's 38 games in charge, it's actually remarkable how little of that time has been spent with the world-class wardrobe himself. Dupont's loyalty to Ntamack seemingly shining through selection. Over Galtier's 4 Six Nations in charge, the highest intensity player outside of the World Cup, the pair played 249 minutes together whilst Ntamack was injured for the 2021 competition, but outside of that championship, have spent just 95 minutes together in 3 years. 69 of those coming in this game against Scotland, where Romain pulled up injured in the first 15 minutes. In fact, the only 2 starts the pair have had together in the 2.5 years since that 2021 competition, but before Les Bleus' final warm-up game against Les Sort of Orange, but let's just call it goal to be polite, were 2 games in the 2021 autumn where Ntamack slotted in as an experimental safety blanket at 12. The threesome didn't really work, and they reverted back to the dynamic dyad for the last game of the autumn, that team to finally perform against the All Blacks, where Romain Ntamack, on the kind of unreal form you'll tell your grandkids about when they ask what was rugby like before they started playing with robots, nailed down the 10 jersey for anywhere up to a decade. That final warm-up game was not just Jalibert and Dupont's first start together for 2.5 years, but just their third outside that one injury in 4 Six Nations. The majority of Blue Smarty the man's game time coming with Maxime Lucu or Baptiste Couillot. Jalibert and Dupont independently are enormously experienced players, but as a combo they spent less time on the pitch together in the last 5 years than Dupont and Ntamack have in their last 5 games. And that's something France are having to work out on fast forward. And so, in an effort to accelerate this process, Fabien Galtier knew exactly what to do, and he took them to Squarespace. Antoine's been making websites with his old mucker Romain for years, but thanks to Squarespace's easy-to-use interface and simple yet deep-ranging features, in no time at all, he understood how to make one with a completely different partner. Nothing was changing at all differently, even though there wasn't the hair. The pair understood each other and had a beautiful website all to themselves that either of them could update at any time or add features to. A glorious thing to admire with so many stuffs. Look, a storefront. Mathieu Jalibert added the storefront where he sold jelly beans, like his surname almost is, but isn't. And if you want to do the same and just sell jelly beans specifically to Mathieu Jalibert, please head to the link in the description and use the offer code SQUIDRUGBY to save yourself some money. Well, Jalibert's reputation is for this kind of shit, and what a good job he does at this kind of shit. If you take a look at his last 2 starts before this summer, these 2 games against Japan, the French Milky Bar kid spent most of his time hoofing the ball into next week, kicking constantly. Clearances were primarily coming off 10, France kicked long and in field a la Ntamack, and whilst in the first match, France only kicked 24 times, the second lowest of any match in the last few years, it was still almost double Japan, a brute-based dominance that allowed France to get on top and eke out control of the game. In the second match, that went up to 35. Jalibert to the fore as he smacked the thing long in a manner indistinguishable from Ntamack, Galtier building out 2 10s who can play the same game plan. However, when paired with Dupont for that final warm-up game against Australia, just a couple of weeks ago, Jalibert kicked the ball just 4 times in 80 minutes. 3 of them after he fielded kicks in the backfield and replied back after Australia kicked it directly to him. And the other being this beautiful stab for Villiers to score. None of them the sort of kick France usually use their 10 for, none of them kind of tactical decisions on an attack. Instead, the majority of France's 33 kicks during that match fell onto the very square shoulders of Antoine Dupont. The chocolate box maestro took responsibility for virtually all game management, from hanging this kind of midfield kick that he'd almost always leave to Ntamack normally, to this, spotting the space and turning a clearance into a cross kick on the fly to escape his own 22. Jalibert's role, compared to Ntamack, was pared down significantly, the 10 operating as a cog in the Antoine machine rather than a co-pilot like Romain. This isn't to say Jalibert had a poor game. He was bloody excellent. He played incredibly well, playing his natural game rather than the one France had him playing the previous summer against Japan. And that's what makes this so interesting. Instead of a 50-50 combo now, France were leaning 80-20 on Antoine. And the thing is, in that final yet first test, it really worked. Australia were put to bed quite comfortably, largely thanks to the kicking game France were able to pin them back with. Because that isn't to say Jalibert can't play to the tactic. This is off a goal line dropout instead of open play, but the idea is the same. Gordon's restart is superb and gets the bounce, but once Jalibert gets his yellow mitts on it, he realises he's got all the time in the world and places the kick beautifully. This kicking exchange eventually leads to a back and forth where France then get the ball back here on halfway in exactly the situation they'd hoped for. Vunivalu is still jogging back to his wing with 3 still in the backfield, having dropped an extra man back in order to cover for the kicks, meaning Romain Ntamack, Kellaway and Gordon are all right back out of the defensive line, knowing another kick is a big possibility with how often France like to do it. Jalibert instead spots his chance to run and steps a few on his way to take it in, and Fickou then flawlessly steps in at 10, which is another really interesting development for France. We're seeing the way both centres are regularly slotting in as first receivers now. Pataya and Donaldson are way over here, meaning Fouquetti is alone covering the side, and Dante's position is lovely. He's set to stretch outside in order to free Penaud, meaning Fouquetti has to watch not just Dante and Penaud, but try to anticipate the overs line. Jonathan bloody Dante, one of the hardest to drop carries in World Rugby, who's going to be a huge loss for France's nose opening game, might be about to run. Fickou flings the missed ball, and Penaud can race away down the wing, having baffled Fouquetti before timing his chip gloriously for the moment Romain Ntamack plants his feet, rather than when he gets close, as most wingers would do, allowing him to circumnavigate the specially in-place kick cover with a kick and finish it brilliantly. But it does pose one more problem. In 2020, we saw Wales do a pretty excellent job of nullifying France by really targeting Dupont, but not in the usual smashed in bro way, but by being smarter. Because he's an 80% shoulders freak, when presented with chances to go 99 times out of 100, Dupont will go himself, so Wales left space around the ruck for him to run at, a trap laid, meaning they could lighten up the defence wider and also attack the breakdown as well as focusing on catch-up defence, shutting him down. It's not a tactic anyone's really replicated successfully since, but we do have one game showing that getting to Dupont and disturbing his game without him having an independent off day as he did maybe against England at Twickenham a year beforehand is possible. And if France are putting all their oofs dans un basket, it just increases the chances of a capitulation if someone else works out a clever one-off tactic or series of traps to lure him in. Because in attack, not only are France bloody exceptional, but the changes with Jalibert are in accent only. France's game under Galtier has been built off a handful of regular attacking weapons deployed liberally, most of which I've discussed at length over the last 4 years, but there's no point tearing it up when it continues to work successfully. The first is a familiar structure known as the submerger. Whilst Wales and the All Blacks have pinched it since, the submerger is uniquely calibrated to the strengths of this particular French team, in a way that neither has quite replicated. The basic idea is simple. It's to play slow, grind, pick and go rugby at an incredible pace. Forwards pile in one behind another, where most sides set a 1-3-3-1 type structure, looking for a pop pass before contact to clear out after. France is instead set up to anticipate an offload, the idea being to isolate each defender and eliminate the option of double tackles, getting you almost automatic game line ball when your team is plagued with the likes of Paul Willemse, whose head alone is bigger than most 6-year-olds, also going to be a big loss, the world's largest thespian, Uni Antonio, and world-class smash man, Gregory Aldrit. It's impossible for even the grandest of opposition players to dominate you in the tackle, especially when they're taking an offload last second with no time to line it up. It creates continuity. Players flood through, expecting an offload, but able to turn it into a clear out. The ball usually finding itself in the arms somehow of Antoine Dupont sooner or later, who can usually turn his forward momentum into a line break and 5 points, or maybe even 7, though that bit's normally left up to someone else. However, the other key to their attack, Laurent Leby's patented stretch formation, is the slightly more interesting one for the change at 10. The idea is to fill the full space, but last minute. The backline will usually take position tight together near one side of the ruck, almost stacked, then as the ball comes out, flash round and stretch apart. Ntamack drifting wider with his outside men getting into distant positions based on where the space appears. With Ntamack, he's usually drifting to calmly unlock. With Jalibert at 10, it tends to have a little more chaotic kinetic kinetic energy offer a submerger pattern here. France pull the two together and flash round. A great dummy line combined with the ever-present threat of Dupont, causing Scotland to bite in, and the backs having stretched right out leaves Maitland in hot water. Ntamack would likely engage him, but Jalibert just fizzes right through before linking up. Fickou gets brought to ground, but France go through the phases and call it again. The backs are just starting to stretch, and the Scottish defence will adjust to that when Antoine notices how wide they've gone and drops it on the toe for Penaud to splash down. We get another great example of it alongside so much else that makes France dangerous in this gorgeous attack from that game against Australia. Instead of taking the ball right up to the line, Jalibert dumps it the moment Danty gets up to speed, allowing him the time to line up Gordon, carry right into him, preventing Valentini drifting onto him, getting France so far over the game line they're almost in Belgium. Danty's ball presentation is superb, fast, and Dupont is immediately on the scene picking up. His eyes go out the back and Valentini sees a chance to smash the most celebrated player in the world, and at the end of the day, he's a back row forward, so he goes for it. Except that's just tied another Aussie body in. Fickou's line is brilliant, and whilst his defence and floaty attack get most of the plaudits, maybe the thing, I think Gael Fickou, modern day Gael Fickou that is, not Gael Fickou 5 years ago who no one knew if he was shit or good. Remember those days? Remember when Gael Fickou wasn't just the best centre in the world? That was weird. Is his dummy lines. No one is better at running dummy lines than Gael Fickou. Not just because he sells them harder than anyone else, but because he hits so hard at the end of them. Here he practically barrels two Australians over in a way that's almost impossible for a referee to still notice, and it completely disconnects the Aussie defence. Marchand is tackled one-on-one as a result. The entire effort Australia had coming his way dealt with by Dupont and mostly Fickou. He gets closer to the Belgian border and Francois Crowe sees a ruck and just starts to weep with joy. It's a ruck, it's a ruck, it's a ruck. There's a common modern technique, something Ireland, and by Ireland I mean Peter O'Mahony, are especially good at, called L-ing in. The idea is you kind of clear out in an L shape. You head in straight through the gate, then do a 90-degree turn and drive the opposition players back against the grain in the direction away from where you're intending to go, usually against their fold, meaning their players can't get round the corner to the side you're going to attack. This, when done well, can totally negate the opposition fold and trap them behind the guy sent in to clear out the previous ruck. What Crowe does here is more like Zedding in. He comes straight in sideways and then wiggles about a bit, grabbing and grappling with Australian forwards. It's something he only gets away with because he enters to clear out the guy before the ball carrier hits the deck, meaning his offside line hasn't been created yet and there isn't an obvious gate for the referee. Francois Crowe is one of the best own ball breakdown operators in the world, if not the best, and his impact he has here is bloody enormous. Taniela Tupou, a prop, is the only forward able to fold around because Cross is making himself such a nuisance to the pair trying to get there. If Cross doesn't do his job and clears out like a perfectly clean, less boundary bumping flanker, there are two more Aussie bodies on this side, but as it is, Jalibert can set into his version of the stretch formation, giving himself just a couple of steps to give Nwanga Ntamack something to watch. Both Ramos and Villiers are in his boot, meaning they can completely overload the two Wallaby defenders enough to make them forget this lad's called Damien Penaud, and he's really good out on the wing. Penaud is caught eventually, but the formation allows so many support runners to flood through. Tupou's early tackle on one of them, Villiers, grants France a penalty from which to go for the corner and run this lovely set move to get Jonathan Danty over the line, because whilst France might have lost one telepathic halfback combo, they have another sitting right up there in the coach's box, as Fabien Galtier's own Ntamack, his playing days partner, Laurent Lebede, is one hell of an attack coach. As anyone who's ever tried to Google translate his Midi Olympique articles in the past will know, whilst Lebede has this very fine framework that France play off in every game, as I've just discussed, one of his real game day passions is bespoke, designed moves to target one opposition. Nothing, and I mean literally nothing in the world, gives Laurent Lebede more pleasure than spending a Thursday evening watching repeatedly how an opposition team defends and designing moves exclusively to target them. And in that, we are fairly similar, though he probably does with a glass of wine because he is French. In the past, we've seen France run this glorious move at Twickenham to exploit one very small notch in the English defence to help protect George Ford or Marcus Smith at 10. Under Eddie Jones, they would drop the hooker into this channel, meaning nobody's watching for the overthrow here. As such, the centres jam in, Fickou's pirouette pass, pulling them out of the game and leaving the wider men no longer part of a system, just presenting them with a series of tricky individual decisions which France have calibrated for. In the end, they have several options for whatever the English defenders select, ultimately allowing Damien Penaud once again to cross in the corner. I say that so many times. Whilst at Wallaby, one is simple as hell, which is a very, very simple place. France form a dummy maul to commit the forwards, and Australia's usual strategy is to have Nwanga Ntamack here rush round to fill in once the ball comes out, but it's so fast he's still getting into position, so once McWright bites in on Dupont, which you kind of have to because he is the most dangerous player in the world, providing no one gave Mohamed Houas nuclear launch codes and coordinates for Scotland, it leaves Danty one-on-one with Carter Gordon, who's a decent tackler, but not exactly in the Johnny Wilkinson Butch James smash you backwards mould, and the Colossus can cross for France's opening try. Because whilst losing Ntamack will make a big difference, difference. Jalibert changes only emphasis here or there, never ability. We might see Antoine once again taking on more responsibility himself, but we're yet to see a day where Dupont has looked overwhelmed once. And over the last few years, his game management has become as much a skill as his ability for bullshit. Dupont's tries out of nowhere might be what win you a tight game, but his ability to clear the ball 50 metres off either foot is what prevents you losing it. The knockouts still feel a long way away, and the draw isn't exactly kind on France, set to face world number 1 Ireland, reigning champions of Africa, or their biggest bogey team, the side who they have the worst record against under Galtier, Scotland, in the quarterfinals, or Tonga, Romania. You know, they're both possible. Be great if Romania made it before going on to the semis and final, but that opening game right now has never been more mouth-watering than it feels just a few days out. I'd expect Labid to go whole hog this Friday night. The draw being done so early might have screwed over everybody on this side of the competition, but it's also given France 3 years to prep for the All Blacks to line up this game in particular, which reportedly Galtier is the one who requested it was the opening night. He's had 3 years to line up this opposition and for his little mate to work on moves, to target them on infinite Thursday nights. Because what Guillaume Guirado said that fateful day in the Oyster Stadium changing rooms has very much come to pass. A young, talented French squad that has now come of age, now started to click, and now built the absurd level of depth to which even an injury to their second most vital player doesn't remove them as contenders. For decades, at every game France played, we heard the same cliche, and we asked the same question. But the French team that turns up tomorrow night might just be the one that puts that to bed once and for all. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. And so finishes the series on words I never thought I'd say. Every team in the Rugby World Cup. There's a playlist out there. Please go and check them all out. They've taken a hell of a lot of work to get to this point. One day out from the Rugby World Cup, we bloody did it. Thank you for watching those. There's so many more. That was France, as you worked out. There's Namibia, there's all the Tier 2 nations. There's Portugal and Chile, which I'm really proud of. There's deep dives into the others and how they might get on. Please, go and have a look, go and have a thumb around, and otherwise I'll see you tomorrow for more rugby. Intending to do a live stream tomorrow morning. Hopefully that works, everything goes smoothly, and I'll see you then for then, I guess, or if anyone's going to be at the opening game, as will I. I'm very fortunate I managed to get a ticket, and I will hopefully see you there, where I imagine there'll be plenty of rugby.
Je pense que j'ai chopé le meilleur. Qu'aurait pu être mieux. Ah, mulet, c'est top.
Ah, voilà.
Tiens, je te fous la chaîne. Magnifique.
Franchement, tu m'as gâté là.
Le tard de le voir.
Je suis hyper content.